of our guest this evening, which is Simone Cipriani. He's the head and the founder of the Ethical Fashion Initiative. He founded and manages the initiative, which is a flagship program of the International Trade Center and a joint agency of the United Nations and World Trade Organization. The EFI advocates a more responsible and sustainable fashion industry. They harness the power of fashion as a vehicle out of poverty by connecting artisans in the developing world to the fashion supply chain. Since its inception, the initiative has evolved to work with emerging African designers to promote their talent at an international level and support Made in Africa production. And that leads us to our guest perfectly. Our guest of honor this evening is Omoyemi Akerele, and she's the founder and executive director of Style House. Omoyemi, as the director, is a fashion creative consultant and works with the development agency in Nigeria that seeks to support emerging African fashion designers and in the African fashion industry. I'm sure many of you are quite aware of Omoyemi's work. She's really legendary in the space of promoting African design, which is finally coming to the attention on a world stage right now, and she's been absolutely pivotal in getting that attention on the world stage. So in 2011, she founded Lagos Fashion and Design Week, which now features more than 40 Nigerian designers and hosts a series of masterclasses, installations, and exhibitions. It's dedicated to promoting fashion as a viable contributor to the Nigerian economy and to promoting African designers on an international level. So we welcome both of you here this evening. Thank you very much for your presence. And without further ado, I will introduce Simone and have him continue. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sas. Hey, I didn't know how to start, so I decided to start with a hey. I was in a conference on luxury a couple of weeks ago in the UK, and you know, in these kind of conferences, everybody was very handsome, beautiful, very slick. I was the only ugly one. And I was speaking about the fact that luxury has to be sustainable and this and that a lot of good fashion comes from Africa. And there was one of the participants, a very nice gentleman of my age, so not so young anymore, who said, Mr. Cipriani, sorry, but fashion, Africa, yes, there are creators in Africa, but you don't have much production. And I told him, man, you are old. You have my age, but you are old, I am young, because you are completely outdated. Africa is full of activities related to fashion. Africa is like a cluster, especially some countries in Africa, like Nigeria. You know what is a cluster? A cluster is a place, not a huge place, where you can find all the activities related to the value chain of an industry. So in fashion, in the same place, you find people who make raw materials, who transform these raw materials, you find designers, you find services, everything. Italy, when I was young, I'm Italian, you understand this from my accent. Italy used to be a huge cluster. In the same place, I was able to find every kind of artisans, every kind of products, every kind of raw materials. And cluster function on social capital. Social capital means trust. There's trust among the operators of the cluster. So there's a very positive dynamic. An artisan who needs to make a pair of shoes can go to a tannery to buy the leather and say, look, I'll pay you the next month, and they accept it because there is trust. I find the same configuration, I find the same dynamic of cluster in Africa today. This is a series of lectures on sustainability. Clusters are sustainable. When there is trust, there is also another thing, which is social control. You check on each other, and you don't want people who belong to your community to carry out bad practices, such as exploiting people or the environment, because you don't want dirty things to happen at your doorstep. And again, This is the reason why the Italy of when I was young was a very sustainable system. Then we discovered mass production, marketing, and all this kind of stuff, and maximization of margins. And we started sending labor away, sending the production away, sending the raw materials away, and we lost everything. We lost the nature of this industry. And then, when you send labor away and when you divide labor into many small repetitive tasks, yes, you pay less for the labor, but you devalue labor. And the same with the environment. This doesn't happen now in Africa. It's still all together. To me, it's something astonishing. I want to show you something. Africa is, first of all, a creative pole. Today, there are many creative poles all over the world. Here in New York, in Milano, in Paris, in Tokyo, Auckland, Sydney. But some of the creative poles are also in Africa, in Lagos, in Accra, in Nairobi, in Cape Town. In Africa, you find a lot of raw materials. A lot of the leather you find today into the international supply chain of fashion comes from Africa. All the gloves are made out of sheep and goat leather that comes from Africa, in case of fashion. You have leather in many different qualities. You have chrome leather, you have veggie leather. You start having chrome-free leather from Africa. You have cotton in Africa, a lot of different kinds of cotton. And you have many, many artisanal capacities to transform all these things. But not only to transform the raw materials into product, also to enrich the raw materials. You have a culture on natural dyes in Africa, which is something unbelievable. This guy here is Abubakar Fofana, who is the wizard of indigo. The wizard of indigo. He lives with indigo. He even drinks indigo. He's incredible. He's a blue man. He's indigo. But he's unbelievable, guys. He's unbelievable. He's got several big pots of indigo with the bacteria of indigo inside, and he knows the age of the bacteria in every single pot. And depending on the age of them and the way in which he feeds them, they give a different color, blue, pale blue, up to green. It's incredible. It's all organic. He drinks it seriously. The last time I was with him, he said, Simone, do you want to drink it? No, thank you. If you have some wine, this is my indigo. But it's something unbelievable. No, they laugh because they know that I drink a lot of wine. It's something unbelievable. Something unbelievable that you find there. The first time I saw a completely natural way to tan leather, it was in Samburu land in central North Kenya. They were using usually the bark of the trees, but also some ashes and urine. And the result was amazing. It was naturally tanned leather. We are investing now in the leather industry all over the world in heavy metal and chrome-free leather, which is the frontier of this. But communities in Africa were already doing that, using very natural products. And now I tell you a story, which is a bit weird. The grandmother of my wife, not my grandmother, the grandmother of my wife, and you will understand why I underline this. Once she told me, you know, Simone, when there was a newborn, if it was a girl in the old days, we used to wash her face with her urine. I said, what? That's awful. Why? We used to do that to remove the hairs. So I thought two things. Thanks God they didn't do this to me. But the second thing is that in the Samburu land, they do exactly the same to remove the hairs from the hides and the skins. So there are processes which are mastered by African artisans, which are very old, which are embedded in the DNA of African artisans, which are incredible for the industry of fashion. And in the same place, you find artisans who can transform these materials into goods. You find designers. You find fashion shows. You find creative directors. You find the environment of a cluster. You are students. You are business people. You're all young, much younger than me. If you want to think about the future, one of the places you have to keep under your radar hates Africa, because it's the place where you are going to see this dynamic of the cluster to produce something completely unexpected. Still today, some of the most interesting retail experiences in fashion are taking place in Africa. It's something unbelievable. I have here, and I salute Abrima Erwia, friend of mine. I didn't see you, I've not seen you for ages now, Abrima. But we've met and we got to know each other in Ghana, where we manage a small thing and Abrima is trying to manage a big thing. And poor Abrima, she engaged with us, so she's been our victim. She does something in Ghana which is exactly this, investing in a place that will become a cluster. Mimi Plange, a designer from Ghana who works in New York, who's going back to Africa to produce in Africa. You can speak a lot about this. But today, and I close my presentation because I don't want to show you all these things. This is Salvatore Ferragamo. I didn't remember why I put him, but he was from Florence like me, so you know, it's always good to put Ferragamo somewhere. And he was from Florence, the best place in Italy. I mean, it's good to do it. Today you're going to listen to something about Nigeria, about Africa, about the system of fashion, the industry of fashion, the artisan, this cluster concept from Omoyemi Akerele. Omoyemi is the creator of the Lagos Fashion Week. She's a creative director. She's engaged in many activities aimed at mentoring and supporting new designers. She's engaged in activities aimed at creating new productive capacities and so on. I want you to listen carefully. It's not easy to get hold of Omoyemi. She got to travel from Lagos to London. Thanks God she was in London, but then she crossed the ocean to come here, and she's leaving tomorrow. So it's something unbelievable that she's here with us today. But she's one of the best observers of the change in African fashion today. In my opinion, she's the #1. She doesn't want me to say that, but I do it. Ladies and gentlemen, the princess of African fashion, Omoyemi Akerele. Half done, what's that?
Good evening, everyone. And thanks for that introduction, Simone, and thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor to be here and to, share with you our thoughts on African fashion, the direction we think it's going, where we think the future is. And I'm going to start by saying the future lies inside each and every one of us sitting in this auditorium. And why, you might ask. African fashion is something that's existed and it's always been there forever. We only need to look at stories about culture and tradition and history to understand that there's always been a part of fashion in the everyday way of, of African people all over Africa. So if you think the Maasai, or you think about the Yoruba culture, the Yoruba people, or the Hausa people, or you think about the Igbo from Nigeria as well, you only have to look at, behind the traditional clothing that people wear to be able to see what has formed or what has been inspiration to countless designers on an international and a global scale. And we at Lagos Fashion and Design Week, we're at the forefront of trying to re-engineer and reposition the minds of the people to understand that what makes African fashion, what makes it unique, what makes it stand out, what makes it different is not just the replication of European influences. What makes it stand out is the celebration of the African in the piece. I say this with all due respect, because not all designers are influenced directly by African culture. It's not every designer that you see their work is reflective of, either modern or traditional African culture. But at the same time, most of the designers or some of the designers are influenced by it. I was just sharing with Simone that it's not by accident that you see that most African designers are inspired by color. It's not, it just doesn't happen that you see that there's quite a bit of embroidery sometimes, or you see embellishments, or you see, you know, something that's beyond just the dress or just, you know, like a traditional or a plain silhouette. And for us, it's where we're at now is how to ensure that designers celebrate who they are as a reflection of their journey, as a reflection of what their story is, and that's what's going to make them stand out. I mean, the world, you only need to look around you and realize that the world is saturated. The fashion from New York, Milan, Paris, London, it's saturated with everything. You've seen it all. But what makes you different is the ability for us to be able to tell stories and how to link all of that with clusters like Simone was talking about. That's the future. And the beauty we have in Africa is we already have that system in place. So an example was indigo that Simone was talking about. If we look at indigo, in Nigeria, we call it adire. What is adire? Adire is basically a process, a dyeing process that's been passed down from generation to generation. So the societies in Nigeria, from Oshogbo to Ogun State to even parts of Kwara State, that's what feeds the society. And what's even more interesting is with the rising influence of fashion on a global scale, designers are looking back, you know, into such traditional techniques to influence and redirect who they are as designers. If we think about a designer like Makio, a lot of people, you see the collection on the runway. She's one of the designers, I can say, who's really tried to celebrate her story side by side with, show you a collection and at the same time celebrate the story of where the collection is coming from. So you can actually almost relate to the fact that there was some guy or a group of women that she's worked with to come up with a print, or to come up with, you know, the motif that goes on the dye that tells a deeper story, whether or not it's about. In the olden days, it could be they use cloth to tell stories. It could be like you're trying to send a message. Maybe there's someone coming. You could see the garments, and it could be there's someone, a visitor's just coming to town. It could be a house and a tree, and you know that's meant to be very symbolic of a deeper story or a deeper communication tool that they used at the time. But increasingly, some designers are beginning to tap into that. So where we're at now is how best do we look at all that artisanship, look at the natural craftsmanship that comes from Africa. If you look at Laduma, who's from Cape Town or South Africa, who works predominantly with merino wool and mohair, and if you think about where the best of that wool comes from in the world, it's from that region. How designers like that have been able to take couture techniques that are inherent, that a part of the DNA of Africans, and they're able to interpret or reinterpret all of that into modern collections that you either see on the runway or you see maybe Michelle Obama, for example. It begins to show you that there's so much more we can do within Africa. It begins to show you that, yes, industrialization might be the future, because Nigeria alone, there are about 170 million people, and we're at the cusp of what do we do? Do we modernize the techniques? Like in Ogun State, for example, which is the center of tie and dye of Adire in Nigeria, the question is, how do we modernize this? Because there are the people who make the fabrics on the one hand. The more you modernize it, the more money they can make. But at the same time, how do we do it in such a way that there's a balance and we do not lose the very art of what that is about? So with modernization and industrialization comes, that very thin balance between losing all of it to machines, losing all of that beauty, all of that artisanship, all of that heritage, which has been passed down from generation to generation to machines who just churn things out and produce it in a way that becomes readily available on a global scale. So it's about working with clusters and empowering people in such a way that they can feed off each other within an ecosystem that's been created in a sustainable fashion as well. So yes, here's John, who's in charge of indigo, or here's Mary, who works on the silk loom to weave the ashoke that we see at the end of the day. How many of the fabrics can John make per day to ensure that he feeds his family? And how many of the fabric, or how much of the fabric will be made available to Diola Sego at the end of the day for her to be able to design her collection and make it available to the world? So that's the story. That's what we need to think about. That's how, I mean, with Simone chatting upstairs, we're probably going to get to a stage where we realize that some things are probably going to be best left in small quantities. So if you're going to think about, oh, I want that piece, that Ashoke dress, it's probably not going to be available in all the Macy's stores across America. It's probably just going to be available in one store. And maybe therein lies the power, therein lies the beauty. And if at all we're going to commercialize the process, we're probably going to have to diffuse it significantly in such a way that, yes, the very essence of the story might be lost, the craftsmanship might be lost, but hopefully somewhere, in some place, in some town, it's being celebrated that this is the origin, or this was the origin of fashion, and this is how it began. So if we think about, if you reflect a bit further and think about how did African fashion first come into everyone's consciousness? Not that it didn't exist, it's always existed, don't forget. But how did it first come into, how did people tap into it? So if you reference maybe Saint Laurent's collection in 1967 and you sort of diffuse it and break it down, what made it so, what was the Africa in it? What part of Africa was being celebrated? And then you look at the embellishments and you look at the beadwork and then you look at the colors and then you look at the fringing and then you sort of break everything down into multi-levels of stories. And in breaking that down, you realize that all those elements were done either in an atelier or within clusters of people with different strength. So you have a group of people who do the embellishment, or you have another set of people who do the embroidery. In Nigeria, for example, the Northerners have, their strength with embroidery is renowned and it's well known. And then you probably think about embellishment, which is something that's mostly left to women to sit down and hand embellish. So if you think about the sub-clusters of people that come together to make that sort of collection, maybe then it's high time we all sat down. I mean, I'm talking to a diverse audience, not necessarily Africans, but maybe it's time for us Africans to sit down and understand how best to work within an atelier system or moving things from that system into a system that's a bit more diverse and can create something that's even more beautiful. But then again, the main or fundamental problem that African designers have is because it's their reality, they do not know how to tell you these stories. So countless of them have probably worked within this system or have probably experienced this in some shape or form. So if you look at some of the designers we present at Lagos Fashion and Design Week, for example, or using a young designer we've just worked with in London at the International Fashion Showcase is Mina. And she created this beautiful hand-woven coat that was made from silk thread. And it just sat there on the mannequin. And people walked past, and everybody knew there was something special about this coat, not just from the way it hung or the motifs on it, but they couldn't quite tell, and they couldn't quite connect with it because the designer as well wasn't available. But imagine if the designer had taken time out to share with them, listen, this coat was made by a group. The story of this coat begins with some women in Oyo State somewhere who, on their hand-woven looms, have created beautiful black silk threads, and in Nigerian language, it's called it's called the etu, because it's black and it's so rich and it's just so different. But nobody can visualize that. They've just seen a black coat that's hanging. And then she goes beyond that. When that was done, we decided to create print, and the print was sort of, embroidered into patterns on this coat after the silk's been done. And then she goes further to tell people that she decided to create a design that's, a bit inspired by there's something we call the buba in Yoruba language, which is basically like a blouse. So the sleeves are a bit puffy, and then it just sort of flows out. Imagine if there was a story accompanying that piece. It takes it from just something that's hanging out there to something that's, you all have a deeper connection to, and therein lies the future. To be able to celebrate the people behind that one garment, the people who've been involved in the process of making that beautiful garment, and at the same time ensuring that we create a balance between all of that and sustainability. So how do we tell the stories, ensure that the whole process remains commercial, so the designer makes money, but the woman in the village who's woven the cloth as well has something to take care of her family at the end of the day? That's the beauty of Africa. That's the beauty of couture. So, I mean, it's the good thing is it's going to be our reality for a long time, because industrialization and manufacturing is something that we're not there yet. It's probably going to take us a while, and that's something we're working on now. You know, how do we get the designers to understand? Because we also want it to be commercial. We also want we want to create make retail out of design, or the work of designers within Africa. We want to be able to tap into 1 billion people on the continent. We want to be able to tap into the fact that there's a bit of diversity. There are over 200 languages spoken on the continent, and as such, you know, all of that trickles down into what you see sometimes and what's made and what's in the stores, and it's reflective of who we are. So we want to be able to do all of that, but at the same time not lose the essence of who we are, not lose those stories, not lose everything that's got meaning, what makes us different, what makes us stand out. So yes, it's a coat, or yes, it's a scarf that you have around your neck, but if Simone tells you the story behind that scarf, it comes to life, and then you begin to understand the processes behind it, the linkages between rural and urban migration. You begin to understand the role that, you know, wealth creation plays in fashion. You begin to understand the role that job creation plays in fashion. You begin to understand the role that empowerment plays. You begin to understand and celebrate the woman who's next door, who's a part of my reality, who's contributed to making my skirt beautiful or making my bag. I mean, you referenced the fact that leather, sometimes it makes us want to cry. In Nigeria, if you think about tanneries and how many tanneries still work today, it's unbelievable. Kano State in Nigeria is one of the biggest suppliers of leather globally. Nigeria, we supply leather to Louis Vuitton. There's no Louis Vuitton store in the whole of Nigeria, okay? That's the reality. So if you think about the fact that for for the designers who work with leather in Nigeria to have access to leather, most of the leather is exported out of Nigeria and sent to tanneries and reimported back into Nigeria. That's my story. That's the story of the designers we work with. And it's not always pretty, but that doesn't stop them. They've used that. They've used something that's supposed to be a handicap. They've turned it into because eventually they have to buy bags, they have to buy leather that's mostly scraps back into the country. So they've been able to create one-off pieces that make you feel like, you know, and I think I have one of those bags tonight, to create bags that are sort of one-off pieces, because yes, they've been made from scraps, but they've been able to turn it into a story, their own story, which I still complain is not communicated to the world, but it is a story, and it's what makes us different. So, back to clusters, Simone. So how do we work best? How do we, you know, create opportunities for all of these people? Some people you probably never meet, or you probably see videos, in a world where there's an increasing consciousness amongst people to find out who made your clothes, to search deeper, to find out why you're wearing a piece of garment, and everyone who's been involved in the process. I believe that's the future, and for Africa, it would create a better understanding of who we are, what we do, and contribute further as well to empowering the whole continent. Thank you very much.
And now the questions to Omoyemi, because she's the guest, she came from very far. Questions.
So we have 2 microphones set up at either end here, and you're free and welcome to start asking questions. We ask you to line up and ask questions either for Simone or for Omoyemi. Thank you very much.
I just have a quick question. I read recently in the Wall Street Journal that Nigeria will have one of the largest populations in about 20 years. How do you think like the urbanization would I guess, modernize the fashion? Do you think it would be modernized in 20 years, or it would still be kind of like the same thing now?
Oh, I mean, we're already in the process. As we speak currently, clearly we all know how much the price of oil per barrel is, right? It's about $20, $25. So sorry, off the record. But increasingly, the Nigerian government has realized that creative industries, that's the future. It's the future for, one of the future for the Nigerian economy, and I'm sure the African economy on a wider context, or within a wider context. So there's been an increasing demand or need to ensure that fashion as we know it, or fashion as some elements of it can be industrialized. Some elements of it can be, manufacturing can help create an opportunity for fashion to become more accessible to that 170, 180 million people you're talking about, and affordable fashion as well. So not necessarily couture pieces or or made-to-measure pieces, which, don't forget, is the system that African designers predominantly operate or have operated from within the last, 4 or 5 decades. So does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. I am co-founder of a fashion brand that's an ethical fashion brand, Vogue Italia, and we started our line in Ghana. And when we went to Ghana, we really learned about the textile industry there and how it's been shrinking because of copycats of the Ankara or the Boudin that comes into the country, and then some of those factories have shut down. How is it in Nigeria as far as the producing of fabrics and things like that? Do you find that that market is also suffering because of, copycats or, and anything like that flooding your market? Do you see that in Nigeria, or is that not necessarily an issue? How do you protect that, or at least the artisans that are there producing, like the wonderful, indigo and things like that?
Yes, the Nigerian textile industry currently is suffering a huge, it's been bad for the last 15, 20 years since the increase in importation of fabrics from China and the rest of the world. And of course, like you said, it shut down so many factories, which, the textile industry in Nigeria used to be one of the biggest employers of labor in the 80s, but fast forward 90s to, in the noughties, and we're at a stage now where things are almost at a standstill. And don't forget, there was a time when the Nigerian government banned the importation of fabric. It didn't necessarily help with anything else. So currently, we have very few factories operating. But that system is completely different from the system we've talked about, because that's pretty much like the industrial textile manufacturing, which is where the nation also needs to look at, because that's how you're going to clothe 170 million people, and not necessarily with, the couture or, the handmade fabrics that we're talking about, which, like, Simone and I said, we're not quite sure if you're meant to industrialize the process, or if you're meant to, make it available to 170 million people in such quantities, because you might lose the very essence of what it is. Absolutely. So yes, to answer your question, Nigeria does suffer that a lot. It's crippled. There's some states in Nigeria, cities in Nigeria that relied predominantly on manufacturing. And when you go to such cities, you almost cry, because the factories, they were the biggest employers of labor in certain regions, and with the companies closed down. So, men are sitting at home while the women, are doing all the work because there's nothing for them to do anymore. So it's really sad. And unfortunately as well, it's very expensive it's easier to, sort of revive a fashion industry, but the textile sector, whew, it's completely different.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's right.
Hi, wanted to ask you a question about something you stated in terms of the challenges for designers to say their stories in Nigerian designers. How do you propose that we help them be able to tell their stories, not to just Nigeria, but to globally? And then how do we nurture that? How do we nurture them to be able to become better storytellers?
Okay, I don't think it's something that will happen overnight, because it's how we are as Africans generally. There's this whole thing, yes, there's national pride, and we take pride in our work. But simultaneously, there's that thing of, you just need to do, it's a mentality, just do your work and present it and let the work speak for itself. So it's almost like a reorientation where people think, you're not necessarily boasting, or you're not necessarily, pumping up your own ego by telling people the amount of work you've put into this. It's just, letting people become more conscious that you, for one, you've been able to empower X number of people within the process. So if we think about companies like, there was a whole video at some point about, was it Kim Jones for Louis Vuitton and the Maasai, that collection, I can't remember what year. Yeah. And you see the videos. So I know that's a different, designers will probably tell me, Omoyemi, yeah, I designed the collection now. I have to spend money to make a film to show it, but it's worth it because it's, it's the human connection. So now it's beyond just the clothes. There's so many designers pouring out from everywhere in the world, and everyone's got something, everyone's got an eye, everyone's got something that probably stands them apart. But what I believe is the future for us, in Africa is, let's just take time out. You can make a video from your phone. You can just, maybe when you go and check out the person who's weaving the fabric that you need or the dyeing process, you can just, it's something you can shoot yourself just to add to the process. It helps bring it to life. It helps people be able to connect with what you're doing a little bit more. So, and then of course you have people like Simone who are very good at storytelling, and and they've done countless videos as well for designers they've worked with to show the process between the fabrics come from Bogola, and then you probably see the end result on the runway. And you have a few, you have maybe Makio as well, who's invested in that a little bit. You have, I think, Laduma is beginning to do that. Diola Sego has invested a bit. So we just need to create a bit more consciousness in the minds of people that you need to storytell. You need to storytell. And hopefully we can take, not that we're not proud, but we can take a bit more ownership of the work that we've done and celebrate the people as well who've contributed to the process.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you both for speaking today. I learned a lot today. I had a question about something that you were speaking about. You referenced the fact that Nigeria is one of the largest suppliers of leather globally, and the fact that Louis Vuitton in particular, you guys re-import it. And I guess my question is, there was a couple, I think it was in 2008, Louis Vuitton made a rendition of the Ghana Must Go bag. And I don't think there was like a lot of story behind that bag, right? And I guess what I'm asking is, how do we lend inspiration? So how do you, as Africans, I'm not African, lend inspiration but still hold the people that take that inspiration accountable for those stories? So it's the flip, I guess it's the flip of what he asked, right? So he's asking about how do we as Africans tell our stories, but how do we also keep those stories accountable when that inspiration is taken?
There's a whole lot of discourse about appropriation of culture going on. And if we sit in this room and discuss that for the next 2 hours, we're probably still going to be here. There was a whole backlash about Valentino's Spring Summer 16 collection, about, okay, this looks amazing, but what's going on there? So those are conversations that we're probably not going to be able to deeply go into, because, and it goes back to what he's saying. If you don't tell your story, people are going to borrow influences from your culture, and they're going to attempt to storytell. It's the same way I say to people like, with the indigo or with Ashoke. I'll probably hold on to Ashoke because it's really ours. And there's a whole conversation around China trying to make the same thing. If you don't tell the world that this is the process and this is how you do it, someone's going to tell you that story, and when you listen to it, you're not going to be happy about the presentation of it. But what are you going to do? If you haven't done anything about what will you do? So you sit down and write articles. Burberry's autumn-winter collection had, prints. We claim it's African. I say it's not African, but, my colleagues tell me, Yemi, well, it's not African, but it's become African because we make money for the Dutch. No problem. Who's going to go there? Are you going to have a conversation? Are we going to have that Burberry conversation again? I'm tired of it. Right. I don't want to go there because there's so much more we need to do on our own that we can't keep holding on. Oh, that influence came from Africa. Been there, done that, bought a T-shirt. So let's, we leave it. It's our reality. What are we doing with our reality? What are we doing to share that reality with the world that, yes, this is from my perspective. I was born and brought up in Lagos. I'm a Yoruba girl, and this is my culture, and I'm a designer. And yes, you might not see the direct interpretation here, but it might be a silhouette, it might be a cut, it might be the color, it might be something that connects who I am with that collection. So I hope that
Thank
helps.
you.
You're welcome.
That side there.
Hi, I'm Abrima. Hi.
Ooh, Abrima.
So my question is, you're both pioneers in the work that you do, ethical, sustainable, African luxury fashion, before it was a sexy word and before we saw it in the media so much and we saw it in stores so much. And my question is why did you decide to start Lagos Fashion Week and the Ethical Fashion Initiative, and how did you do it?
No, Simone, no. You first. No. For me, it was simple. I mean, with a group of people, I'd worked on the scene for a while in Nigeria, and I'd seen the fact that, yes, we had fashion events and we had fashion shows, but even though sometimes now I feel like we're almost back in the same place, where designers show their work, and then that's it, like, what happens next? And don't forget, I come from an environment where everything is celebrated, everything is a party. There's just always something, it's a party. So fashion shows, it was like going to a party. It was like going to some sort of entertainment. And you're trying to distill all of that and tell people, no, guys, this is actually serious. These guys have spent X thousands of dollars on this collection that that's just gone down the runway. So for us, it was about finding the balance between that and how do we create a system out of this? How do we empower designers from this? How do we look at everything else that's missing, from education, to manufacturing, or to textiles that we've talked about? How do we put all of that together to help people understand that it's an ecosystem and it's something bigger? So we're not there yet. It's been 5 years. But we're on our way there, and hopefully sometime soon in my lifetime, the Nigerian fashion industry will have come full circle. Thank you.
Very fast, because I want to leave space for Omoyemi. You know how it started, Abrima. I was spending time in Islam of Nairobi. I was living in Ethiopia, but I was spending my weekends in Islam in Nairobi because I am a slum dweller. You see this from my face, all hairy, all ugly. And I found there are some incredible artisans. And with some of these artisans, we created together a cooperative of shoemakers. And I realized that for the first time in my life, I was back in the Italy where I grew up. Artisans, creativity, beautiful people. I fell in love for it, and I decided to create this concept. It was market-driven, of course, because I had buyers in fashion, in the industry of fashion, who were available to develop collections with a beautiful story of development, with a beautiful human story behind. And this is what we did. And one day I will also tell you the story of how I met Chloe in Uganda, and she didn't want to work with me because she thought that I was something very bad. But that's another story. There.
Good evening. So you talked a lot about telling a story. I think in today's marketing-driven and heavy marketplace, a lot of global brands are doing everything they can to sell that story to the customers. And I think as consumers, sometimes we get very exhausted with all these stories because there are so many stories. And, to be honest, I don't go on the history or the backgrounds of all the global companies. or fashion brands that I buy for. I guess my question is, how do you advise your designers to communicate that message authentically with their customers, and how do you, what's behind telling the story, and then how do you convert that into sales and purchase? Thank you.
Okay. I'll use an example. There's a designer called Makio, and each season she tells you a story, but not necessarily with a video or a fashion film or anything like that. She is just sharing the inspiration for the collection, but she sort of weaves in a little bit about where it's coming from into the story in such a way that you know that this is distinctly African, unmistakably an African story or rhetoric or something like that. You know, so I understand what you're saying, that the marketplace is saturated. Who needs one more story? I just need a dress. No, it's true. I just want to walk into the store and just grab a dress and just walk out, you know, at the end of the day. But I'm not quite sure I agree with you fully, because at the same time, you're raising a society of people. You're raising on a global scale the need for people to be more aware of what they're buying. You need to be more aware of what you're consuming. You need to be more aware of where it's coming from, because it's more than just a garment sometimes, you know? So I think it's a responsibility that is two ways. So yes, it's on the designer who wants to let you, you know, welcome you into her world, but at the same time, it's that conscious need on the, you know, on the part of the consumer to want to know, who made this dress? Where is it from? Wow, that indigo scarf is beautiful. How did that happen? It's not just in Nigeria that, you know, indigo is used. There are parts of the world, but what makes it different? So I think it's a dual responsibility. And I think, you know, with all the campaigns out there, I know it can be tiring, but I think that's where the world is going, because a lot of people have died in the process of us not caring where our clothes are from, and from just walking into that store and grabbing a black dress off the rack. There's more to it than that. So, sorry, one more story coming your way before you.
Perfect, thank you.
But I want to tell you something about stories as well. I agree with Omoyemi. We need more stories, not less stories. But we need stories told in a different way, because a lot of stories that I hear today in the industry of fashion are fake.
Right, yeah.
They are fake, they're bullshit. Plain bullshit. This is how you define them technically, bullshit. It's a technical definition. There's a famous brand with two celebrities, husband and wife, come to Africa. They get out of the plane like this, very beautifully, with a beautiful bag. Oh, that's bullshit. Technical word. Nothing offensive.
Your words, not mine.
No. This is my. I put some technicalities into the speech. The story has to be what Omoyemi was saying. It has to tell you the reality of people behind this product. This is why at Ethical Fashion we do impact assessment. Impact assessment is a system with social workers who go to see what is the impact on people, on the communities of the work that you carry around. And the impact you can measure. You can measure the change in nutrition, the change in housing, sanitation, how many kids go to school before and after, what is the incidence of the most common disease. You can measure that, but then at the end, it's what Omoyemi said. Even if you measure everything, you have to have this interest to raise the interest of consumers to know more, and consumers to ask more about the human reality behind the products. We are trying an experiment now. We are working with a group of African cartoonists. You can imagine cartoons, and we are doing cartoons on the stories of some of the artisans that work with us in Africa. Cartoons made by African cartoonists. It's incredible how you hook the attention of people with this. So on our side, to do more, to tell the stories and so on, but consumers ask, and the story has to be human-centered. Not CSR, not all these things. We did an inspection and then the building collapsed.
Or building wells in villages.
Brava. The other side there.
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for being here. I'm Chidinma Shuke. I'm actually a PhD student studying apparel design. I do research specifically the things you were talking about, history of fashion, tracing it back to Africa, those kind of research. So earlier you mentioned about Louis Vuitton not having a store in Nigeria, and a lot of those designers not having a store in Nigeria. I do think we do need to ask ourselves, are we part? By the way, I'm Nigerian as well as an American. So we should ask ourselves, are we part of the problem? Because Nigerians love Louis Vuitton, Nigerians love Dolce & Gabbana, Nigerians love designers. So even though there's no store in Nigeria, we find them. We find where the stores are. We go there, we buy it. We order these products. On the other end, you spoke about telling the story. I always thought the same thing as well. I'm an adjunct professor of business and economics as well, and marketing. So telling the story, marketing our story. Some of you might already know Nigeria also has one of the biggest movie industries, Nollywood. Has done a lot for Nigerian fashion, a lot for African fashion. Have we thought about partnering with those movie directors in making documentaries that would document some of our designers in terms of the design process? As an artist, that's something I'm part of and I would like to do more of.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's something worth exploring. I mean, to explore more linkages between our natural Nollywood industry. Yes, there's been collaboration, so the designers will probably, I mean, Lanre da Silva Jai recently worked with Bolanle Austin Peters production to design all their costumes. So there is collaboration already going on. But in terms of actually creating documentaries around the work that they do, that's a fantastic idea. That's something that someone needs to tap into and look into and explore to be able to, whether or not it will be commercial, because Nollywood is all about, it's got to be commercial. Whether or not it will be commercial, that's a different story, but it's definitely worth exploring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for a great program this evening. I'm a curator of design at a museum in the city, but I don't often intersect with fashion, so this has been really fascinating. My question is more about affordable design. I'm really interested in hearing more about the intersection of all the opportunities and challenges of affordable fashion and sustainable fashion, either specifically in Nigeria or more generally in terms of African fashion, because as someone who studies design, I often see affordable not always meaning sustainable, but then there are really interesting examples in terms of product design, industrial design that I'm looking at right now that are both of those things, and I truly do believe it's the way forward, and I'm interested in either examples or just the general kind of temperature of that conversation in terms of contemporary fashion in Nigeria.
Currently in Nigeria, we've not been able to successfully create a mass production system for fashion. So mostly everything, like 99% is atelier driven. So you have groups of designers or designers within the ateliers who make what they do. So we don't have that, I mean, it's embarrassing to say, but it's the truth. So we don't have that one brand yet that's maybe going to be Nigeria's, let's see, maybe H&M. We don't have, not yet. So we have a few designers on the scene, maybe even, not designers, a few brands, maybe even Tribe, they're quite new on the scene, or maybe Gray Project. But on the level I think that you're talking about, to be able to actually look at how such businesses have been able to maintain or retain aspects of sustainability in the process of developing those brands. So we're not there yet, but what we're trying to do is, as we're about to start laying the foundation for manufacturing and industrialization of fashion, so to speak, is to re-engineer into the minds of the people that we need to grow organically and not just go straight from 0 to we want to create 1 million pieces because they're 100 and so that elements of sustainability are involved with it, involved in the clothing, in the process, and at the same time to ensure that such businesses are still commercially viable.
I think that's extremely true. Just to add on to that was my second question, or maybe a thought for a later conversation. As a design curator, I keep seeing actually that it's not often scalable to keep things sustainable and ethical and also affordable. But I have seen platforms like Kickstarter or Etsy, and they have pros and cons certainly, offering a marketplace where you can take ethical, sustainable design, keep it at a certain scale, but offer it out in a much broader way, or connect with a much larger marketplace or audience. And so I wonder if that's something that is a conversation happening across those platforms or different platforms in Nigeria. But
So
I don't want to hog the mic.
We will probably be talking to you. That's where we need to go. That's the way out. You know, I'm not, because I'm honestly not sure. That it's not going to happen. I don't see. Even Tiffany Amber, whose clothes, you know, are still a bit commercially, they're wearable. I still don't see her operating within that system where she sends her pieces off and $1 billion, or, you know, I don't really see it. But at the same time, there's a need to create brands that can clothe the nation. So it's how to keep the process sustainable is where we're at. That's where we're at now, and how to ensure that it works best for everyone. Simone, I think you would have something to add.
Just one word. Sustainability is a function of how you treat people in the supply chain, finished. You can treat people well and do the production that you want, even industrial production. Whenever you hear the thing that it's difficult because people, it's rubbish. It depends on how you treat people, the place of people in the supply chain. And this is a matter on how you structure your costs and where you allocate the value of what you do. Because if you want to maximize the profit and you squeeze people, this is not sustainable in any way. Sustainability is about people. And that's the bottom line. The rest is something to build on. As long as you see some big brands with troubles in Bangladesh or in Vietnam, this is not sustainability. And it cannot be sustainable. But if you want to do it, if you want to make it happen, this is feasible, because there are brands that have proven that. There. Your time.
Hi, thank you for being here. So yes, I agree with you. Sustainability is very much about people, but it's also about the environment. And we know, there has been so many proofs that industrialization always brings pollution. It's just the sheer nature of it, because the amount of products that are being made and the process and the maximization of production. So knowing all of that, you know, by looking at what's going on in China and other places, do people in Africa, especially in Nigeria, where it seems to be a lot of artistry, do they understand that? And would that make them actually try to strengthen the whole artisanship, try to make things in a maybe larger scale than couture, but not necessarily have to ever fall into the mode of industrialization? That you sometimes made it sound like it was something that was like you're hoping for that to happen. But wouldn't that be better to just kind of say, okay, we actually don't want that, because it's just there's no way to be sustainable and industrial at the same time, I don't think. So, but actually try to come up with ways where you can still maintain that, appreciation for craftsmanship and artisanship and all of that, but in a bigger scale, or maybe the prices have to be reevaluated. I mean, there are a lot of ways to approach that where you can still produce more, but maintain the essence of it and not have to fall into industrialization. Is that a conversation? Is that something that people are thinking?
It is. It's an ongoing conversation because, like I said, it's where that's where we're at now. You know, there's a need to scale up. But then again, there's a need to maintain and retain elements of who we are. So how do so are we going to have designers who have like separate collections? So yes, you have that collection as your sort of like your couture, inspired collection, which you reproduce in smaller quantities, and then you have the fusion label, which is produced on a certain scale that's larger than that. And of course, I also think that there's nothing wrong with continuing education, especially for an industry like ours that's just on the cusp, it's just starting out. So we're going to have to work with as many people as possible to help us, put in the minds of the people that, like Simone said, sustainability depends on how you treat the people. That's going to help us understand that, how do you create these pieces without, and reduce the carbon footprint as well? How do you create a collection, you know, on such a scale, and you're not polluting the environment, either with the indigo or, you know, if it comes to denim or, you know, whatever it is that we're working on. So I think it's, we've got our work cut out for us, and hopefully if we can ensure that all of this is intertwined with the process from the beginning and not something that's an add-on, then there's hope.
No. There. Otherwise, I speak 2 hours on live. There.
Hi, I wanted to know how accepting the elders are of, how accepting are the elders in Nigeria of the fashion movement, like having fashion designers? Because as a Nigerian, I wanted to go into fashion design, but my mom thought it was a bad idea. So like how are they accepting of the movement of like fashion designers, and also that the youth are the future of Africa with all the, you know, the movements and the protests? So how are the elders, like the politicians, like how are they feeling about this new industry?
I don't think they have a choice. Sorry, they don't have a choice. I mean, look at it. If you think about the African population and what percentage of the African population is the youth, you don't have a choice. That's the future. You have to empower them. If you think... Yes, that's the reality. So it's you know, it's what, you know, the youth make of that. I think it's actually the reverse. So if you think that, you know, all of this, I mean, they're looking to you to become consumers, they're looking to you to contribute to the economy, they're looking to your source of income to, you know, to be a part of what contributes to a nation's GDP. You're looking at creative industries, which is where the bulk of of young people now, not everyone, but a significant proportion of people, that's the future. So yes, in a country like Nigeria, you know, but if we think about the role that the government has played, either with empowering Nollywood industry, they also know, you know, either in terms of funding that's been made available to Nollywood, or funding that's been made available to the music industry, it's all a part of that reawakening to the fact that creative industries are the future, and the bulk of people that work in there are like young, you know, entrepreneurs, or young entrepreneurs who probably they're future leaders tomorrow and future entrepreneurs. So it's time for you to come home, darling. It's trust me. No, I'm serious. It's not. It's new. You know, that's no longer there. There's a sense of pride now. You know, parents call me and say, I want, you know, they've done masters in different degrees. My daughter wants to intern with you, or my daughter wants to intern with a designer. Who would you recommend? So it wasn't like that even when we started. Even when I started, my dad, who's you know, one of my champions now, at the time was like, you went to school, master's degree in law, you worked in a law firm. I don't know about this fashion, you know. And today he's taking a lot of interest. So what are you doing? Where are you going? Oh, you know. So it's. I think that was about 10 years ago, but now the scene is set and the stage is right. So please come home and show us what you've got.
I will.
You can go home without any problem. Have the last question there. Am I mistaken? Yeah, no. The last one there.
Okay. Hi, thank you again for coming tonight. So I'm really interested in ethical supply chain management and building transparent supply chains. And I think you probably answered the first part of my question a little bit, which is you mentioned Nigeria, the industry in Nigeria right now is somewhere in the phase of melding the clusters together with trying to scale out production and become more commercially viable. And I was just curious if you could speak to that a little bit more, where exactly in that intersection you're at and what some of the biggest obstacles have been. It sounds like you're still sort of in an atelier phase, and have some of the obstacles sort of been around training new labor in terms of pattern making or grading, and then also where the industry in Nigeria is in comparison to the rest of Africa, and how that is different, if at all.
Okay, I'll start with your last question.
2 questions in one.
Yeah. If you think about South Africa currently has the We call it, they've got the ideal industry. So yes, they have educational institutions with S. You know, they have a fashion district. They have fashion council. Even though my colleagues in South Africa tell me, Omoyemi, you're joking. You guys have a better thing going on. Well, you know, we're always going to compare. But South Africa has, in terms of education, capacity building, skills development, they're doing a very good job. Kenya as well is doing a very good job. We in Nigeria don't think we're there yet, you know? So if we think about production and the level of sophistication in production, you look at Kenya, you look at Ethiopia. I mean, Ethiopia started how many years ago, Simone, and now they're contract manufacturing for brands, you know? So you have countries that are doing good work. Ghana, as we speak, Ghana is next door neighbor to Nigeria, by the way, and you still can't compare, you know? So Ghana is also light years ahead of Nigeria in terms of what we're talking about. Nigeria just, I mean, there's been talks about it for the last 4 or 5 years, and believe it or not, most state governments have left a legacy of abandoned manufacturing companies, you know, as a legacy, but they're empty. Some have machines in them and there's nothing happening. But now that there's no oil, okay, there's oil, but so, oops. So now there's this, you know, all of a sudden Calabar is announcing, oh, we have this. All of a sudden Kano State, you have that. Kaduna, you know, all these factories are popping up everywhere. So from that angle, Nigeria has a long way to go. We have talent. We have quite a pool of them. But most of what we do is still informal, from education to retail to manufacturing to all the elements that you think probably make fashion fashion. So if you think about the fact that on a global scale, creativity is meant to be about 1%, and maybe the technical, the industry, 99%. In Nigeria, it's the other way around. So we have like 99% creative people and 1% technical or industrial skills, which you need to support all of that. So we're now at that phase where we're trying to, you know, sort of like steer it in a different direction to create a balance between both. And we're looking to countries and possibly to collaborate with other African countries like Kenya, like Ghana, like Ethiopia, like maybe, you know, South Africa as well, to help us or contribute to making this happen. Because Pan-African trade as well, or intra-African trade, is the future. So it's how Mimi Plange is Ghanaian, but I want to go to Kenya and be able to buy Mimi Plange. You know, I want to go to Nigeria and it's right there. You know, we have, there's a store in Nigeria called Alara, and then of course there's Temple Muse and a few brands, and you can find other African designers that's not just Nigerian in those stores. So for us, the future is, how do we work together? How do you ensure that within the ecosystem, there's an understanding between retailers, designers, that we're sitting on a gold mine. It's 2 billion people, do the math. So that means if you want to clothe the whole continent with 2 billion people, you can create brands that work for each demographic within that population and fit into it and make it work. So yes, you know, Europe still holds its appeal because everyone wants to be celebrated abroad and back home. So I'm not saying we'll still do the work we do outside Nigeria, but we know where the market is and we know where that money is coming from, and that's the future.
Guys, you are so privileged. You got Omoyemi Akerele with you for more than 1 hour. We thank Omoyemi now. Thank you, Omoyemi. Great talk, great speech. Thank you for being with us.
I want to thank both of our guests. Omoyemi made a special trip to New York just to speak to us this evening, so we're incredibly honored that she made this trip, and so happy that we had the opportunity to hear what she had to say. This has been videoed as well, so we will be sharing it. Will be on the website. And Simone, as always, it's a pleasure. We're so... We are so happy to have you here, and thank you guys for coming out on such a miserable night. We hope to see you again on Friday, where we have the second part of this series with Bob Bland. So we will have manufacturing in the US versus manufacturing in Africa. Thank you very much.